Hi, I'm Penny. I'm from Deutsche Bank, and I'm running their global social media strategy for employer brand at the moment. When I was asked to come and speak today, I was trying to think what I could tell a room of industry peers about using social media at a bank. My previous role, I worked for the World Wildlife Fund, and arguably the social that they put out was more innovative and a bit more exciting. But then they are a big huggable charity, and they can get away with a lot more. So banks, definitely not so huggable, and really putting anything out on social is pretty challenging. So I thought that I would take you through some of the challenges we face every day and the ways that we overcome them. So, first challenge, finding one voice on social. Basically, we have 100,000 employees. They work across 70 different countries. So there's multiple locations, multiple divisions, multiple levels of seniority. So that diversity means that we're trying to be all things to all people on social. We're also currently having a bit of a shift in location as we move from those traditional hubs into the non-hubs. So moving from like London up to Birmingham. And that's meant we've had to really reposition ourselves in those markets. So how we solved this, and it kind of mirrors what Ben said, is that we started really small. So we started off with just a strategy for graduates that just used Facebook. And I guess that enabled us to learn a bit about using social media before we broadened the scope to professionals and different locations. So before we really expanded into that professional audience, we really looked at creating a content network internally and creating processes so that all of our divisions could share through a single page, so giving them all a voice on social. That was the nod. Subtle. Okay, so managing approvals and finding ways to share. Obviously, as a bank, we have multiple levels of compliance to adhere to. We have a 4 eyes moderation process on everything. All the content has to be retained for auditing, and the approvals have to be retained for auditing. I mean, in the US, we have 2 of our financial accreditations, which is FINRA and SEC. Basically, they run policies around social media usage. So if we were to not adhere to their policies, then we could basically lose our financial accreditation in the US. And that's certainly not something I want on my CV. So basically, when you're trying to adhere to that level of compliance, I guess it's sort of the level of compliance makes sense when you look at it from that perspective, but it does make it really hard to be nimble on social. So the solution, I think, in a nutshell, it's to be structured. So we work in a very structured way with 33. They pull together a calendar of content every week, and that content is pre-approved by the content owners, and then it's approved again by DB. And that sort of calendar structure means that we can save everything down because we can be audited at a 2-hour notice for those US accreditations. And recently we were actually audited internally by our group brand team, and we were actually held up as a best practice case for using social. So well done, Ben. So navigating the complexities of a massive organisation. In short, DB is just vast. I joined in a newly created global role, so there was no inherited structure, there was no neat handover, and frequently the hardest thing was finding the person to ask the question when you've got 100,000 possible candidates. So massive company also means that we have masses of content, and it's hard to know who owns it. It's hard to know if it's been used before. It's hard to know who can approve our using it on social. So that general volume is always something that is a problem for us. And quite a lot of the content that we get, that we come across that's really good, is on our it's through internal publications, and obviously that's supposed to be shared with employers, but it's really interesting content for our externals, and it's just always a bit of a nightmare trying to figure out who it is that we can get the approval from. So again, solution really was that we started small and focused on grads. And the grad strategy we had, basically, we recruited ambassadors who are in our global training program to share updates. So the content, because the content was all original, we didn't need to track down content owners. So it was a good sort of slow start for us. And then before we broadened the scope, we really spent a lot of time internally defining what our objectives were, because defining our objectives enabled us to define really clearly the content we needed to deliver them. Right. So, cautiousness of social media. DB is known as the quiet bank. It has a really low-key PR strategy, and it's also very conservative, so it's not really a natural fit for social. And even the content that we come across on db.com is still sometimes embargoed for social. We're not allowed to share it because they have a real cautiousness and nervousness around it. So how we overcame that was we really used social to convey a personality of employers, of employees. So, for example, the ambassadors that we recruited from the grads were talking about what they were doing, so they weren't really talking about Deutsche Bank all the time. So what our main objective was to just create a personality for the bank and not just use it as a PR tool, and ultimately to become sort of an insightful and useful tool for our graduates. Seamless. So, how we've embraced social media. So we now obviously work with 33 very closely on social media. 33 took over those relationships that we had started off internally, so those content deliverers, and they've also worked really hard to create new relationships. So they've helped us build our network. They've also, we work with them on a weekly editorial meeting, and we have that weekly calendar, so they further helped us work in a really structured way. Success stories. The obvious one for me, the one that stands out, is DB run a Women in European Business conference every year, and we always have a high-profile speaker. This year it was Joanne Lumley, and we sent Livia along. I don't know where she is, but she basically attended the event, and she was creating tweets, sharing them with me for approval, and pushing them out. So that was a new thing for us, live tweeting. The tweets reached over 130,000 different people. The hashtag had just under 200 mentions, and we were retweeted 86 times and picked up by influencers such as MasterCard EU. But it was all kind of new ground for us, and I think it worked really well. So the results, I guess they're up there, sorry, it says success stories at the top. So results, yes, basically, again, you probably can't see them, 880% increase in clicks to the careers website, 1 million users reached across LinkedIn per month, 475% increase in Facebook interactions, and a 361% increase in followers on Twitter since we started working with 33. And I should say they didn't start from zero. So, what's next? Well, really, more of the same, ongoing optimisation. We're also looking at some new channels for next year. I think Google Plus is probably on the list. We're also launching a new careers site, and it's a bit of a content monster. It's really content-driven, lots of videos, so there'll be a natural interaction between those two. And I guess to close off, my boss told me to close it with the one thing that I've learned. And I guess from a DB perspective, the one thing that I've learned is to really get the internal processes and the relationships in place before you start to look into social media. That's it.